In today's video, we're going to use the power of JavaScript to remove plastic from a CSS ocean. Welcome back to Web Dev Simplified. My name's Kyle, and my job is to simplify the web for you so you can start building your dream projects sooner. And in this video, we're going to build this amazing CSS ocean with trash that you see on the right side of my screen. And to get started, I have a few files that I already have downloaded, so I'm going to show you how to get those. The first is the TeamSeas logo, which you can just get straight from their website. And the rest are a bunch of different icons we're using to represent trash. So we have the shopping bag icon, this liquor icon, toys icon, a smartphone icon, a headphones icon, and a takeout dining icon. And these are all from the Google Fonts material design icons, which you can search for on here. We're going to close out of all of those so we don't need them. And then also we're going to be using a custom font. In our case, we're going to be using the Open Sans font from Google Fonts. We're going to use the bold variant. So just scroll down to where you see bold here, make sure you select it. And then on the right-hand side, you can just copy all of this link code and we're going to paste that into our HTML page. And speaking of, we need to create an HTML page. So let's just create an index.html page, hit exclamation point and hit enter. That'll generate us all this boilerplate code. And then we can just paste in those link tags that we just copied. And that's going to give us this custom font. Now, in order to use that font, we need a style sheet. So let's create a style sheet here. We're just going to call it styles.css. We're going to link that, and then we'll create the actual styles.css file. And in here, I just want to select everything. So we have our everything selector, our before selector, and we're going to have our after selector. And all I want to do is I want to take my font family and I want to set it here to Open Sans. And then I also want to set the fallback to Sans Serif, just like that. And instead of typing this all out by hand, we can also just copy this directly here and paste it in from Google Fonts. Either way is going to work just fine. So that's going to give us the font on our entire application. So now if we just put some random text inside of here, like that, if I save this and open it with Live Server, you'll see in just a second that'll open up, and you can see that we now have that custom font showing up instead of the default font, which you can see if I just get rid of this line, that's going to be the default font. It just looks a lot better. Now, the next thing I want to work on is going to be that TeamSeas logo. So in the top left-hand corner, you can see this logo right here, which is animating in and out. I think it looks really cool. So I'm going to show you exactly how to do this animation. First thing we need to do is to create our logo. We're just going to create a single div with the class of logo, and that's it. That's all we need to do. Then inside of our CSS, we can come in here and we can select that logo class. And we're going to need a few different things. We're first going to need the logo itself. Then we're going to need to have the before element. And we're also going to need to have an after element. And I'll explain why in just a second here. So we have our before and our after. Now this main logo class is just going to act as a container for both our before and our after elements, which are going to be the real meat and potatoes. And our before element is going to be what shows us our image. So as you can see, we have this image right here, which is our wave image. And then after is going to be the thing that goes up and down in that wave animation that's going to make our image show up completely opaque or partially transparent, as you can see over on our screen. So in order to do that, first let's get our container set up. How large do we want this to be? Well, of course, the first thing we need to do is give it a width and a height. So we'll say width here is 5 rem, and our height is going to be 5 rem as well. Let's just go over to the page where we're rendering this and give it a background color for now of just red, so we can see what we're looking at. There we go. We have that red square. We want to make this a circle, so we're going to say border radius is going to be 100%. That's going to turn it into a circle, which is great. And then the next thing we need to do is position it in the top left corner. It's already there a little bit by default, but I want to make sure it's always going to be there. So I'm going to set the position to absolute. I want the top to be 0.5 rem and the left to be 0.5 rem. And now it's always going to be stuck in the top right corner, even when we remove the margin from our body. As you can see, when we remove this margin, it still stays in the top left corner, which is great. And we could move it further around from the corner if we wanted, but I think 0.5 rem puts it right in the top left corner, which is where we want it. Now, obviously, we don't want a background color, so I'm going to remove that. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to set overflow to hidden. This is super important because when we do our after element here, the thing that's going to swipe up and down, it's actually larger than our logo, so we need to make sure the overflow is hidden. And the next section is going to be our actual before element, which is just going to be the image. So we're going to set our content equal to an empty string. And then what I want to do is I want to come in here and I want to say that our background is going to be our image. So our say background is going to be a URL, and that URL is going to be /images/ and I want to get the TeamSeas logo. There we go. Now if I save, you'll notice nothing actually happens, and that's because I need to make sure I position this absolutely, so it's going to just show up right over top of where our container is with that position absolute in place. And if I set the width to 100% and the height to 100%, it's now just going to fill the entire space of that circle, but you'll notice the image is quite a bit larger. If I get rid of this overflow hidden, you can see the image is overflowing this a bit. So what I need to do instead is I need to come in here and say background size, and I want to set that to cover. that's just going to make it so that the image is always the exact right size to fit within the container we give it. So there we go. Now our image is set up exactly as we want it to be. The next thing I need to do is this after portion. So instead of here, again, we'll just do an empty piece of content, and we're going to position it absolutely, so it's going to show up in the right spot. And here what I want to do is I want to essentially create a rectangle that is twice the size of our real container. So width and height are going to be 200%. Then what I want to do is I want to come in here, I'm going to say background color, and I'm going to set that to red, just so we can see what's going on. So we'll say red for now, and you can see this is overflowing our container. And if we get rid of that background size cover, if we get rid of that overflow hidden and save, you can see that this rectangle takes up a lot of space. It's twice as big as our original container. Now the next thing I want to do is I essentially want to center it inside of here, so I can set the bottom to 0. That's going to make it so that the very bottom of our container is at the bottom of our circle. And I can set our left to -50%, and that's going to center this red square over the top of our logo section. And now when I put this overflow hidden back on, you can see that our square is essentially right here. It's just the bottom is at the bottom of our circle, and it's way overflowing the top. Now to give us that wave animation, what I want to do is I want to put a border radius on this. So we're going to say border radius of, for example, 35%. If I again get rid of that overflow hidden, we can kind of see that our corners now have this large rounded edge to them. And in order to give the wave effect, if we just rotate this square while moving it upwards, it's going to make it look like there are some waves going on. So let's create an animation called waves. I'm going to make it be a 5-second long animation with an ease in, ease out timing curve. So we'll say ease in, out. Make sure I put that colon there. And we're also going to make it so that it alternates. And that's just going to make it so the animation goes up and then down and up and down. We want this to happen an infinite number of times. We never want the animation to finish. So we're just going to say infinite. Now let's create the keyframes for that waves animation. And by default, we want it to start from this position. So we don't even need to give it a from. We're just going to give it a 2. And we want to say that we're going to change our transform to have a translate y of -50%. So now what's going to happen if I save, you're going to notice this moves upwards all the way until it essentially gets to the very top of our circle, and then it's going to stop. And then it's going to move back down and continue like that. The last step is to make it so that it rotates. Now let's just make it rotate 540 degrees. Now you can see it has that nice rotation, and you can kind of start to see the wave animation a bit. If I now take this overflow hidden and add it back in, you'll see here that we have that wavy kind of animation look. And if I change this background color to white, for example, you can now see as it's going up, it gives us that nice wave filling all the way to the top, and then it's going all the way back down to the bottom. Now, in order to give it a partially transparent feel, instead of doing white here, we're just going to use HSL. Let's just say, for example, 0 and 100%, and make sure this is 0% here. That's going to give us a white color, and we want to make this partially transparent, so we'll say 0.9 for our HSLA color. Now you can see our logo is mostly not able to be seen because that white color is mostly opaque. It's 90% opaque, but you can still see a little bit of the logo through it. And then when the white square moves up, it's going to make it so the logo is 100% visible. So that's how we create this really cool logo animation effect. Now the next thing I want to work on is going to be the actual background that we have. As you can see here, we have this nice ocean background. And this is a beautifully done background that I actually didn't create myself. Instead, I found this on CodePen by someone called Polina Hetman. This is absolutely beautiful. And when I was looking for inspiration, I found this and I just figured I could never do it better than this. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this exact CodePen. So we're just going to come in here, we're going to copy the HTML, and we're going to paste it into our page here. And we can just minimize that down. So we just have our HTML like that. And then we're going to take this CSS and make sure that you're using the compiled CSS. We're just going to copy all of that, and we're going to paste it down at the bottom of our CSS here. And if we save and we come back over here, you can see that we now have that kind of sunset animation going on. And again, it's a beautiful animation. And you'll notice though that our logo disappeared, and that's because if we just scroll down here a little ways, everything is set to this Z index of 1. So what we need to do is find our logo, and we're just going to change the Z index here. Let's just set it to 100, for example. So that way it always appears over top, and there we go. Now you will notice our animation stopped working, and that's because I accidentally have HSLAS down here. Just get rid of that A, and now you can see our animation's working again, but this white color just doesn't look very good over top of this nice purpley background. So what we want to do is we want to find the purple color of the background in this area. Now I've already gone ahead and done that for you, and essentially it's going to be the color here 290 as our hue. We're going to have 31 here as our saturation, and our lightness is going to be 67%. And now this is going to give it a nicer color that's going to blend much more with the background in that area. And if we zoom out here to 100%, you can see that purple color really blends in perfectly with the background, and it looks like it's just a partially transparent image. Now, the next section that I want to work on is going to be the section that displays the money. As you can see right here, we have a number that displays the amount of money raised so far, and it matches up to the TeamSeas number over here. I want to place a container for that number. So what we want to do is go over to our index.html, and inside of here, right below our logo, we're just going to create a div called money. And actually, let's make this an h1, not a div, because that would be much more semantically correct. And in here, we're just going to put an amount for now, just a placeholder. We'll just say $120, $234. There, $100,234 is going to be our money, and we want to be able to display this in a specific location. So back into our style CSS, let's come down here below all of this. We're just going to say .money, and for our position, I want the bottom to be 50 VH, and I want to make sure this is position absolute, like that. And now if I just come in and give it a z index of 100 so it shows up, you can see our text is right here showing up on our screen. Obviously it doesn't look that great, so let's change the color here to white so we can see it a little bit better. And we're going to give it a text shadow. So we're just going to come in here with a text shadow, which is going to be 0.05 pixels. And we want this to be a dark color, so we're going to use HSL 0. We're going to do 0%, 0%, and we're going to do 0.5, so it's 50% opacity. Make sure I put a colon in here and save, and now our text looks a little bit better. Now what we need to do is just move it over to the left. So we're going to give it a left of 50 vmin, and we're going to save that. And the reason I'm using vmin here for the left is because these rocks are sized using vmin. So no matter what happens when we zoom in and out of our browser, these rocks are going to stay the exact same size and in the exact same position. So we want to position our text based on that. Also, I want our font size to scale based on our screen size. So we're going to use 6 vmin here. And that's just going to make sure no matter what happens with our zooming or the size of our browser, our text is always going to be the right size. Now all that's left inside of here is just to remove the margin that's default onto H1s. That's going to push it right down to the bottom of our water, which is what this 50 VH is doing because our water is always 50% of the screen tall. And then lastly, I'm going to set an opacity on this to 0.5. And that's just going to make it blend a little bit better. And since the screen changes colors a lot in this animation, that color change is going to show up in our text and it's going to look good. Now one last thing, I don't like the fact that you can select the text. So we're going to remove the ability to select any text by changing our user select to none. And that just makes it so the users can't select anything at all on our page, which for our use case is fine. Now the fun part is going to be adding in all of the trash onto our screen. As you can see, we have all this trash here. The next part is to be able to create a container we can put all of our trash in. So inside of our index.html, if I open this section up, we have our landscape. You can see we have all this section up here. And then if we scroll all the way down, we can see this section called front. And this front section contains these like reeds and rocks that show up in the foreground. We want our trash container to be over top of all the water stuff, but behind the front stuff. So we're going to create our trash container right here in between these different elements. And that's where all of our trash related stuff is going to go. So now in our styles here, if we just scroll down all the way to here, we can say our trash container. And we want to make sure that we position this absolutely. We're going to make sure that the width is always 100%. We want it to fill the full width of our screen. We want the height to be 50 VH, just like that. And we want the bottom to be 0 and the left to be 0 because we want it to show up from the very bottom left corner to the top right of our water. And if we get this a background color of red, for example, and I save this, you're going to notice you can see that showing up right here. Obviously, we don't want this background color of red, but it gives us a good example that our trash container is filling the space that we want it to, so we know this is where we want it to be. And then we're going to put a bunch of elements with the class of trash inside of here, and we're going to position all those absolutely. So I'm just going to make sure we add that position absolute right here. Also, I'm going to change the opacity here to 0.75, just because I want them to be partially transparent to take effect of the color change that we have in our animation. Now, the next thing we need to do is add that script tag. So let's come all the way up here. We need to add a script tag. Going to have a source of script.js, and we're going to make sure we defer this so it loads after our HTML. Now, if we save that, we can create that file called script.js, and inside of here, we can run all the JavaScript we need to make this page work. The first thing that I want to do inside this JavaScript is to get some of the elements we need. So for example, we need our trash container, which is document.querySelector, and that's just trash container. And then we also need to get our money element. So we'll say money element is equal to document.querySelector, and that is just .money, and that's just this element right here that contains the text for our money. So right now we can remove this text because we're going to put that in automatically with our JavaScript. And then what we can do is we can create a formatter. We're going to call this our currency formatter, and we'll just say new intl.number format. And we want to format in the US format, so we're going to say ENUS. And then what we want to do is we want to change our style to be currency. Make sure it's lowercase, just like that. we're going to change our currency here to US dollars because that's what TeamSeas is tracking. It's tracking US dollars, as you can see here. And then what we need to do is we need to say that our maximum fraction digits are going to be 0. Essentially, we don't want to have any decimal places being tracked. Now, what this currency formatter allows us to do is pass it a number, and it's going to give us a string that's formatted in a currency very similar to what we have right here. So what we can do is we can just say a random number. Let's just say our amount raised is equal to a random number. I don't even know what this is. It's just a random number. What we can do is we can say that our money element dot inner text is going to be equal to our currency formatter, and we want to format the amount that we have raised. So now if I save this, you can see we've raised $1,023,423, and that's just this number right here, formatted as an actual currency based on this currency formatter. Now, obviously, we want to get the actual amount of money raised from the TeamSeas site instead of just using a random number. So to do that, let's create a simple function, call this an async function called setupTrash. And the reason this is an async function is because we're going to use fetch to be able to get the amount of money raised. So we can say const amount raised is going to be equal to awaiting a fetch call, and we're going to fetch to this URL right here, which is https://tscache.com/donation total.json. Essentially, I just went through and I scraped their website to figure out where they're getting the data that they're populating right here, and they're getting it from this file, and this file is just a simple JSON file. So we can say .then is going to be res.json to convert the response to an actual JSON format. And then we can take the data, and this JSON object has one property called count, which is the amount of money raised so far. Then I can just take this money element inner text, paste it into here, get rid of that placeholder variable. And as long as I call setupTrash, you should see that this number, 10,823,529, if I refresh this page, is exactly the same number on the TeamSeas website. Actually, this one's a little bit higher because someone just donated in between the time that I queried it here and the time that I queried it over here. But as you can see now, these numbers are exactly the same. So now we're displaying this information on the page. The next thing we need to do is actually figure out how much more money we have to raise. So we know that the total amount of money that I want to raise is $30 million. So we can save that in a variable called max money raised. And that's going to be equal to 30 million, so 30, 123, 123, that's 30 million right there. Then what we can do is we can say, how are we going to display this trash? Obviously, we want to take the amount that we've raised and we want to subtract it from the max amount raised to figure out how much there's left to raise. But we can't just put, 20 million pieces of trash on the screen because that's going to destroy anyone's computer trying to render that amount of information. So instead of what we're going to do is we're going to use the different icons that we have. As you can see, we have all these different icons. We're going to use each one to represent a different amount of trash. So for example, the plastic bag may represent a lot of trash, while the smartphone may represent a small amount of trash. To explain this a little better, let's say that we imagine every $1 million that we have left to raise, we're going to render out one plastic bag. So if we have, $10 million raised so far, we need 19 million something more dollars. So we're going to render 19 plastic bags. Then for every $100,000, we're going to render a new icon. And for every $10,000, another icon, every $1,000, $100, $10, and so on. All the way until we get down to $10, because we don't really care about single dollars. We're just going to track 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, and 1 million. This may sound a little bit confusing, but let me just kind of explain the code and I'll show you what I'm talking about. We're going to come down here a little bit and we're going to try to figure out how much we have left to raise. So we're going to say amount left to raise. And this is a pretty simple calculation. All we want to do is we want to take the max money raised, subtract the amount that we have raised so far, and I want to make sure that this is never less than 0. So we'll say math.max, and we're going to say that number or 0. And the reason I want to do this is because if our amount raised is like 35 million, we're going to do 30 million minus 35 million, which is negative 5 million. And I don't want to show negative trash. I just want to show no trash. So it's going to either be 0 or a number greater than 0. Then what I want to do is I want to take that amount left to raise, and I'm actually going to convert it to a string. So we're going to create another converter up here. We're going to call this our trash formatter. And essentially all I want to do is I want to take this number, I want to pad it with some zeros in the front if it's too short. So for example, if we only have $5 million left to raise, I want it to say 0, 5 million. And then I just want to have no other characters in there, no spaces, no commas, nothing like that. So we're going to use another one of these number formatters. But here we're just going to pass in whatever, it doesn't really matter. We'll say ENUS here again. But you could put whatever, it doesn't really matter for the format because all we care about are the options. The minimum integer digits is what we care about. We're going to make sure that that is set to 8. That way it's always going to be 8 digits long, and it's going to put zeros in the front. We again don't want any fractions. We'll say max fraction digits is 0. And use grouping, we're going to set to false. That's going to make sure that there's no commas in our number at all. So in order to see what's going on, I'm just going to console log our amount left to raise as a format from our trash formatter. So we're going to say format that number, and I'm going to print it out to the screen. Now, if we inspect over here, go to our console, you can see we get this number 191755552. And if for some reason our amount left to raise is a small number, you can see it now pads it with zeros in the front. So now we always know we have a string with 8 different digits in it, and those digits always represent a certain thing. So for example, we know that this digit right here, 4, represents that there are $4,000 left to raise. And I said we wanted to display things based on how many thousands we have. For example, we want to display 1 bottle for every $1,000 left. So we can display 4 bottles. Or we can display 2 of the next thing we want to display, and so on. So having these numbers easy to access means we can really easily display the different things we want by just getting the number at the specific position inside of this string. Let me just close out of that, and what I want to do here is I want to set this to a variable. So we'll say const stringified amount is going to be equal to formatting the amount left to raise. Make sure I spell const properly. And then what I want to do is I want to create a new variable called trash amounts. And this variable right here is going to be essentially an object that contains the different types of trash that we have. So for example, for the extra large size, we'll do XXL. This is going to be for our largest amount of trash. So this is going to be for every $1 million, we want to display one of these items. So we're going to say our amount here is going to be a number, and we're going to figure out this number based on our stringified amount here. So if you remember, our stringified amount is 8 digits long, and it's going to go all the way up to the tens of millions. So if we want to do one piece of trash for every 1 million, we need to get the first 2 numbers from this string. So for example, if we need to raise $19 more million, this should say 19 right here is the amount. So an easy way to do that is we can say parse int, and we can just get the first digit from our stringified amount. So we'll say stringified amount digit 1, and we can add on the second digit, which is the 1 right here. So we have index 0, index 1. That's going to give us the first 2 digits, and this is going to convert to a number. And let's just console log this trash amount as well as the amount left to raise, just so I can show you what's going on. And if I inspect the page over here, go to the console, you can see that this has an amount of 19, and you can see we have $19 million left to raise. So that's how we're doing this. And if we want to go on to XL, for example, I'll just copy this down for XL. We know this is going to be for every $100,000. Well, we know for every $100,000, that's just our stringified amount digit 3, which is just index 2. And now if I save this and I open this up, you're going to see our amount is 1, and that's because we have one $100,000 left to raise. What I want to do is essentially do this for every single digit all the way down to the tens place. That way we know what type of trash we need to render for each amount. So we're going to render 19 pieces of extra large trash, 1 piece of extra large trash, 7 large trashes, and so on. And of course, instead of rendering out the trash as different sizes, we're going to render different icons to represent that amount. So for example, the icon we want to use for extra large is our bag icon. And if we go over to our images, you can see we have bag.svg inside of here, which is going to represent our bag icon. For extra large, we're going to do an icon, and this is going to be our takeout icon. And again, this is an icon we have inside that folder. We're just going to copy this down a couple more times. We just want to get the very next digit, and we want to change this to say large here. And this is going to be an icon of headphones. Copy this down again. This is going to be for medium, small, extra small. So medium, small, extra small. There we go. And this is going to say 4, 5, 6. Then instead of headphones here, we're going to have phone here. We're going to have toy car. And then for extra small, we're going to have a bottle. So now if I save this and I inspect our page, go over to the console, you're going to see here that we have all of our different categories. And for example, extra large is 19. Extra large is 1 because that's our next digit. Large is 7 since that's our next digit. 3 for medium, 9 for small, and then 2 for extra small right here, which is our final digit because we don't care about this $1 placement. Now the next thing I want to do now that we have this object is I want to convert this object to a bunch of icons on the screen. So I want to loop through all the values inside this object, which is our trash amount. This is just going to give us all the actual objects, and it doesn't care about this label here. The label is just purely for our own purposes. It's not actually useful any other way. Now all we need to do is just come in here with our for each loop, and for each one of these, we're going to get the amount and the icon. That's just the things from our object. And all we want to do is we essentially want to run a function. And this function is going to be a for loop, which is going to loop from I equals 0 all the way up to I being less than our amount, and we're going to add 1 to I each time. So essentially, for each amount that we want, we're going to run the code in this for loop once, and this for loop is just going to run the code create trash, where we pass in our icon. And this is a function we're going to create down here called create trash, and it's going to take in an icon. Let's just move that all the way down here to the very bottom of our code. So this is a very simple piece of code, which is just going to create our icon and add it to our trash container, which is going to give us all these pieces of trash, as you can see over here. So let's start really simple. Obviously, we need to create an image, which is going to be document.create element of an image tag. Now we have our image, and we can just say trash container.append child of our image. And we already know that we want to create the source for our image, so we can say image.source, and that is going to be equal to /images/icon .svg. And let's just make sure we're using string interpolation here. There we go. So that's going to be the source for our image. And now if we save this, immediately you can see all of our images are showing up in that top left corner. So we are printing them out to the screen, which is great, but obviously we need to size them and position them. So now what I want to do is I want to figure out the position of this in the water. As you can see over here, the stuff that's way at the top is much smaller, while the stuff way at the bottom is much larger. And that's because things that are closer to you appear larger, and things farther away appear smaller. What I want to do is I want to find the top position. So we're just going to say const top is equal, and I want to get a random number that's going to be between 0 and 50. And that's because 0 is the very bottom of our screen and 50 is the very top of our screen up here, since we're based on view height units. So let's create that function, random number between, give it a min and a max. And in order to calculate the random number between, what we want to do is we want to get a random number that's going to give us a number between 0 and 1. Then we're going to multiply it by our maximum minus our minimum plus 1. And the reason we're adding 1 here is because eventually we're going to do a floor. You're going to see here, we're going to say math.floor. That's going to round us down. So this is going to round us down, which is why we're adding 1, because math.random is any number between 0 and 1, but it can never actually be 1. 0.999999 is the largest it can be, which is where this plus 1 comes in. Then we're just going to make sure that we also add our minimum onto the end of this, just so if we wanted to start at, for example, 0, it's going to add 0, so it's not going to change anything. While if we want to start at 100 as our minimum, this will add 100, so 100 is the lowest number we can get. So this is going to give us a random number between 0 and 50, which we're going to use as our top. So we can say image.style.top is going to be equal to, we want to get our top value here, and this is going to be a VH unit. So now if we save, you can see our images are kind of scattered along this left-hand side based on this random position from top to bottom. Now, obviously we want our left position to be random. So I'm going to come in here, set our left here. This is going to be a VW unit. And what I want this to be is a random number that's going to be between 0 and 100. So now you can see our things are all scattered out across the screen from left to right and top to bottom, and it's completely random. Every time I save, you can see they're in a different location, which is great. The next thing I want to do is make the size random as well based on this top position here. So the ones further away are going to be smaller. So we can just say const size is equal to our top divided by 5 plus 1. And this is essentially going to make it so that our size is never 0. We always want it to be at least 1. That's where this min comes from. And the reason for this is because the things at the very top are going to have a top of 0. So 0 divided by 5 is 0 plus 1. So their size will be 1. While the things at the very bottom are going to have a top of 50. So 50 divided by 5 is 10 plus 1 is 11. So it's going to be a very large difference in the actual size. Now what we can do is we can say image.style.width here is equal to, and we want to use that size variable. We want to use vmin for this. We want to do the exact same thing for the height. We want the height and width to be exactly the same. Now, as you can see, the ones way at the top are really small, while the ones at the very bottom are very large, and that's going to give us that nice depth of field. Now, the last thing I want to do is make them feel a little bit more alive, make them feel like they're in the water moving around. So we're going to come in here with an image style, and we actually want to call set property, and that's because we're going to set a custom property called rotation. And this is the variable we're going to use in our CSS in a little bit, but essentially I want them to be a random number. So we're going to use random number between -30 and 30. So I want to have some rotation between -30 degrees and 30 degrees, and I'll just make sure I set this as a degree at the end here. So now it's not actually going to change anything because all we're doing is setting a custom property. But now if we go over to our CSS, what we can do is we can actually use that rotation to specify the rotation of our trash. And I'm actually going to do that in the form of an animation, so they rotate back and forth. So for this animation, let's just call it bob, because it's going to be bobbing up and down. It's going to be a 2-second long animation with an ease in out timing. And we of course want it to be infinite with an alternating pattern, just like we had before, so it continually animates forever. And now let's create those keyframes for that animation of bob. I want the from position here to be a transform, which is going to have a rotation, and this rotation is going to be from our variable, which is called rotation. So we're going to start at the rotation we specified inside of our JavaScript right here, this rotation here. So it's going to be random between -30 and +30 degrees. Then in our 2 here, I want to do the exact same thing, but I just want to add a little bit to our rotation. So I'm just going to add 10 degrees. And to do that, we can just use the calc function. So come in here with our calc function, and that's going to give us a nice little rotation on all of our pieces. You will notice, however, they're actually not rotating. And that's because we never added the class trash to these. So here, I just want to make sure we say image.classlist.add. I want to add that class of trash in there. Now, as you can see, they're giving it a little bit of rotation, and they all start with a random offset, which looks really good. The last thing to do to make them really feel like they're in the water is to make it so that we have a translate Y. We're going to start with 1VH as our translate Y, so it starts at the top position, and then it's going to bob all the way down to a translate Y of 0. So they're going to move up and down and have that nice rotation so they look like they're in the water and actually moving with the waves. And that's all it takes to build this project. If you're interested in donating to TeamSeas, I'll leave a link down in the description for you. And if you're interested in learning more about TeamSeas, I have a video covering that right over here. Thank you very much for watching and have a good day.